Well, the indictment comes as Trump deals with several other court cases and investigations.
That's right. Here are some of the notable ones that we've been following. Trump became the first former president to face criminal charges when a New York grand jury indicted him in connection to an alleged hush money scheme during his 2016 presidential campaign.
He's also facing another federal investigation into alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 presidential election, leading to that deadly attack on the U.S. Capitol.
And in Georgia, the Fulton County District Attorney is investigating whether Trump illegally tried to overturn the state's 2020 presidential vote.
Let's go ahead and dig into the actual charges that Trump is facing with this latest indictment.
For that, let's bring in CBS News legal contributor Jessica Levinson. So, Jessica, let's first talk about this indictment. Can you explain the charges as we understand them and the kind of weight that they carry?
So the charges, as we understand them, really relate to the former president being asked for these documents and saying no over and over again, or failing to comply with requests, at least in full. So we know the story here involves the National Archives initially saying to the former president, we think you have government documents and, in fact, classified documents. Please give them back. We know that the former president gave only a portion of those that he ultimately had at Mar-a-Lago back. The Department of Justice ended up issuing a subpoena saying, please, again, give us all the classified documents that you had. There's reporting that the former president not only failed to comply, but may have actually asked one of his aides and or attorneys to help him hide certain information. That's where we kick into potential conspiracy to obstruct justice, because a conspiracy is an agreement with two or more people to engage in unlawful behavior and an overt action taken to effectuate that illegal behavior. We ultimately know that because the former president didn't comply with that subpoena, the FBI obtained and executed a search warrant and then found additional classified documents, some reportedly listed as highly classified. And so this case, the crux of it is not the former president accidentally having classified documents and giving them back. It's him over and over again actively failing to comply. And that's where we get the charges related to the Espionage Act, which is the unlawful retention of certain documents that raise national defense or national security issues, and obstruction of justice of a federal investigation.
So given those, the severity of those charges, what kind of potential penalties would Trump face if he's in fact convicted?
So obviously there is a very big road between an indictment, a conviction, and a sentencing, but these are federal charges. Some of them carry up to 10 years in prison. And we don't know, obviously, which of these charges the former president would be convicted of, what the sentencing would be, if the sentencing would be concurrent or consecutive. But I think the bottom line here is that the former president is facing serious federal criminal charges and the possibility of serving very real time in federal prison.
Jessica, you touched on this a moment ago, but I think some people watching might say, well, Donald Trump was indicted over his handling of classified documents. Why not Mike Pence? Why not the current president, Joe Biden? What can you tell us about the way in which these different investigations are not similar to this particular case with Donald Trump?
Yeah, the best analogy I can think of really deals with library books. So on the one hand, you take out library books, Vice President Pence, President Biden, they find that there are some that are overdue. They call the library and they say, you know what, I have a home library. I'm worried I might have some more that are overdue. Why don't you come and take a look? Contrast that very different from the public reporting based on the former president, President Trump, where the indication is that he took books he never could have taken out at all. Of course, that's similar to Vice President Pence and President Biden. But then when he was called, he said, sorry, I don't have any. Or he turned over one, and then they kept calling and they said, these are really, really important books. And they raised certain concerns. We really need them back. And then he said no over and over again. This is a story not about what was initially at Mar-a-Lago. To me, this is a story about active failure to comply with a federal investigation and give the government documents, again, our documents, back to the federal government.
An analogy I think we can understand, having been guilty of not returning books on time to the library. Jessica Levinson, thank you so much for breaking that down for us. We appreciate it.
Thank you.